Another special edition of East African Budgets, where we are covering and giving you an in-depth analysis on what you can expect later this afternoon when the ministers of Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania and Uganda table their budgets. Of course, Kenya has the largest budget at 1.8 trillion shillings. And of course, we're giving you an analysis of what we can expect. And for this session, we're putting those numbers into perspective, looking at it from the sectoral point of view. Now, more than 60% of Kenya's 1.8 trillion shillings national budget will be channeled towards the recurrent expenditure. Now, simply put, that means paying wages and salaries at 654 billion shillings. Now, there are calls for austerity in the central government and also prudent fiscal management at the county level. Now, misuse of taxpayers' money in the country's 47 county governments has been alarming, with little or no funds left for development. Now, what can we expect in the second year of devolution? Now, joining me in studio is Jason Lakin. He is a senior technical liaison at the International Budget Partnership. But before then, let's have a quick look at some of those numbers with regards to the Kenyan budget. Well, welcome back. Of course, we are still looking and analyzing the East African budgets, and we want to look at the county level, the kind of misuse that we've seen, and also the very low absorption that we have seen at the county level. Now, joining me for that, I have Jason Lakin. He is the senior technical liaison at the International Budget Partnership. Now, many thanks, Jason, for joining us. Now, looking at the county governments, we have seen an allocation of about 226 billion shillings, up from last year's 210. Maybe you can give us an indication, and of course we have the commission, the CRA saying that they want 279. Give us an indication. For you, do you think we're running too fast when it comes to the county governments and the kind of allocations that we have for the county governments?
I think what you said is true. There's an allocation of 227 billion this year compared to the 279 billion suggested by the Commission on Revenue Allocation. I think one of the issues that we need to look at is what is the explanation for the differences between these values. And I think that actually it relates to one of the big issues that we're concerned about in Kenya, which is the recurrent cost of running both levels of government, both national and county governments. And if you look at the CRA recommendations, they included quite a substantial amount above what Treasury was recommending or even was agreed by the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council for wages at the salary level, basically the administrative costs of running counties.
Which are very high.
Which are high, and in many countries, and in most countries, subnational governments have high recurrent spending, especially in the early years. In and of itself, I don't think we necessarily should worry about that, but I think we should be having a conversation about what is the minimal structure that we need at the county level to ensure that we're not spending all of the money at the county level on wages.
So what needs to be done? Let's talk about what needs to be done. I know this is the first year, this will be the second year of the devolved government, but we have seen a lot of misuse when it comes to taxpayers' money. Look, for instance, we have 13,000 assistants that have been employed. That means 6 per members of the county assembly, and that is costing the taxpayers 10 billion shillings per year, which is unnecessary, and I understand it is illegal according to the transitional authority. What needs to be done?
I think a lot more guidance needs to be provided to counties about what the structure at the county level should look like. And I do think that there's actually an ongoing fight about that, which is what I was alluding to before, where CRA is maybe pushing for more higher administrative costs. Others are trying to rein those in. I think we also need to keep some of this in perspective. It is true that counties have been on a hiring spree, but I think we also need to look at the fact that counties have very high inherited recurrent costs. If you look at the cost, for example, take an example like Nyeri County, it was just reported that Nyeri County had to reimburse national government for the cost of salaries that had been devolved, but national government was still paying the salaries. The staff had been devolved. We're talking about roughly 1 billion shillings that was just returned to national government to pay for those inherited staff. So those are not staff which counties have taken up on their own. So I think we have a structure.
After this year, because I mean, we've taken the first year to set up the structures to pay some of those inherent problems that you mentioned. So are we expecting a better government going into the second year of the county governments?
I certainly hope so. I think that certain counties have much more fiscal space than others. So you look at places like Turkana, the counties that have historically been marginalized have much higher budgets. They've been, the formula that we use to distribute resources has redistributed resources to them, and so they're actually able to spend much more on development than other counties. Counties like Nyeri, which would be cash constrained and would be spending a lot of money on recurrent expenditure. What we can look forward to in the second year, I think, is that some of these things will be ironed out, some of the challenges will be ironed out, but I think we also need to recognize that some of the challenges at the county level reflect the lack of guidance from the national level. For example, there is an ongoing discussion about rationalization of staff at both levels of government, but we haven't really seen national government stepping up to actually give us answers on how are we supposed to deal, how are counties supposed to deal with all of these staff. You take a place like Nairobi, Mombasa, their wage costs are above the transfer that they receive from national government. So we need a rationalization policy like yesterday, and we still don't have it. And so I worry a little bit that as we go into the second year, yes, we should be ironing out these kinks, but some of these policy decisions still haven't been made. And so I think we're going to continue to face challenges in the second year.
Let's look at development budgets, especially at the county level. If you look at the absorption rate of some of this where there is money, and in most cases there's either little or none to going towards the development because the recurrent expenditure is so high. But if you look at those that have the little money for development, there's very little absorption, as little at times as 40%. Why is this the case? Very little absorption of development budget at the county level.
Well, I think, again, we need to keep this in perspective. Look at the 2012-2013 national budget. What was the absorption rate for development spending at the national level? It was about 44%. Yeah. National. This is a national government that has procurement systems that have been in place for many years. They know what to expect. Of course, they have challenges of absorption that they've always had, but I don't think we should expect counties to suddenly be able to absorb much more than national government has been absorbing. So that's the first thing. Let's keep it in context. So
it's an inherent problem that they're getting from the central government.
I think it's a Kenyan problem, and we need to deal with it as a Kenyan problem. It's not a problem at either level of government.
Red tape and procurement problems.
I don't think it's just red tape and procurement problems. First of all, we should distinguish between the two levels. At the national level, I believe there's also a problem of overestimating what can be spent. And so we end up with low absorption because we said we were going to be able to spend much more. We also said we were going to receive more. A lot of them at the national level, we're talking about money which is coming from donors, and sometimes it doesn't materialize. So we're overestimating at the beginning. But I do think procurement is an issue at both levels of government. I think we also need to look at the county level. We can't keep making excuses for counties forever, but let's keep something in mind. County budgets, 39 of the 47 counties had to revise their budgets because they had deficits. That means they didn't have final approved budgets until November. So they were a full quarter late in starting to spend. Then they had to set up procurement systems. And there have been a number of challenges, as I said, with both the guidance from national level about how you do certain things and the competence and capacity at county level, which frankly is not where it needs to be. So I think it's not a surprise at all that we're seeing this. And in fact, what I would encourage us to do is to think that we may not want to see very high levels of absorption when we don't have systems in place. In fact, it might be better that we have lower levels of absorption.
The hen or the chicken.
Yeah, exactly, because we may be seeing that money being misused. I think there was a case of that in Kenya at the very beginning where we saw during that first quarter that I just mentioned, most counties didn't have approved budgets. And when the first quarter controller report came out, people started saying, well, counties aren't spending anything. But in fact, they had spent something. And the big question you should be asking yourself is, how are counties spending money if they don't have budgets? So in fact, the absorption rate might have been even higher than we would have expected during the first quarter. So I think we still have to deal with these challenges around setting up of the systems. I do think that counties are diverse, and I don't think we should lump them all into one basket. There are counties which have more funds for development. There are also counties which are doing better in setting up systems. They're not always the ones that you hear about in the media, but in fact, if you look, for example, at the formulation of the program budget, so counties were required to shift to a program-based budgeting format this year, which was done at the national level for the first time last year. So counties are now following on. Some of them have done quite a good job, given the low capacity, the late warnings, the lack of guidance. They've really actually made an effort. So I think we are going to start seeing in the second year and in the third year of devolution, counties starting to separate themselves out. Some of them doing much better. Some of them are still going to need a lot of help and be challenged.
Let's go back to the central government and talk about austerity, because that is the other thing that seems to be a very big challenge when you're looking at the national government. Of course, we've had government saying that they're going to cut down on newspapers. They're going to cut down on something like, I do recall that they also mentioned the issue of domestic trips. But is that enough? Is there much more that needs to be done?
I mean, I think I haven't seen the latest figures on how much they're estimating they're going to be able to save from the austerity measures, and perhaps we'll hear that from the cabinet secretary today. But I remember the number being somewhere between 20 and 40 billion shillings, which is really quite insignificant in a budget that's over 1 trillion shillings a year. Sorry, that's the budget for ministers and agencies. The full budget, of course, is closer to 1.8 trillion shillings a year, including debt payments. But I think we have a structural problem, and I think the government recognizes that. That's why we've been having a discussion about the wage bill. But we also need to look, if you look at what I was saying before, that in fact we overestimate our development spending at the beginning of the year. So if you look at budget implementation, the share of the budget that actually, the actual spending that goes to development is even lower than the spending at the beginning of the year when we're doing the allocations, which tells you that if we really want to change the budget in a direction that we have much more development and much less recurrent as a share of the budget, that we actually need fundamental reforms. We're not going to get it from newspapers and domestic travel. That's important. We're actually going to need to change the structure of government. Part of that is actually going to be about restructuring state corporations and other agencies that are currently duplicating functions that should be done at the county level. But there is a need for a fundamental rethink of how the structure of government at the national level aligns with Vision 2030 and the policies that we actually have in a way that is efficient and reduces the total size of spending across ministries. It can't be done by cosmetic maneuvers. It really needs to be done by saying, do we need all of these departments? Do we need all of these agencies?
Yes. And that's a question that we're going to take shortly after this, because we want to have another guest and also input with regards to the austerity measures that we can take. Well, we're taking a short commercial break, and we'll have the national budget of Kenya, one of the graphs that we have that can also elaborate on some of those numbers that you're talking about, and we'll see you shortly. Welcome back to this special edition of the East African Budget, and in this segment you're looking at the austerity measures that the government needs to take in order to fund the 1.8 trillion shillings that we are seeing in Kenya. And now joining us for that we have Michael Mburugu. He is a tax director at PKF Tax Services. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Now, we had a very nice debate with Jason here, but now I want to get your input with regards to the austerity measures that the government needs to take. Of course, we're talking about domestic trips, we're talking about newspapers, and a little bit of entertainment, and of course the county government has seen a lot of wastefulness. But now, looking at it from the perspective of the national government, is that enough? What other austerity measures need to be taken?
You also forgot about airlifting of speeches.
Yes.
But I do think that fundamentally there is a big problem with the structure of government. And I think as Kenyans, I begin to realize that we made a big mistake in the year 2010. When we created the devolution, 47 devolved governments and the national government, we may have made a very big